Welcome to everyone who's joining us. I can see the numbers go up, so we'll just wait a few minutes until we have everyone here. But whilst we wait, do put in the chat where you're dialing in from today. We'd love to see how global we are. Welcome to everyone who's just joining. We'll just give it another minute or two. Numbers keep rising. So yeah, just a few more minutes and then we'll get started. Okay, big welcome to everyone who's joined us today, and thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to be joined by our expert panelists today, and we're going to be discussing communication best practices when it comes to cellular agriculture. Before we get started with the discussion, and I hand over to Mathilde for a short presentation of some of our new research, I just wanted to introduce myself and ProVeg. So my name is Stephanie. I am the Director of Corporate Engagement at ProVeg International. So ProVeg is an international food awareness organisation, and we're working to transform the global food system by replacing conventional animal-based products with plant-based and cultural alternatives. ProVeg works with decision makers to really help the world transition to a society and an economy that are just less dependent on animal agriculture and is more sustainable for humans, animals, and the planet. We operate globally, and we currently have 10 country offices throughout Europe, America, Africa, and Asia. Our vision is to create a world where everyone chooses delicious and healthy food that is good for all humans, animals, and our planet. And our mission is to reduce the global consumption of animal-based products 50% by the year 2040. In order to achieve these goals, we work across the entire value chain, which really gives us unique insight into some of the key challenges, hurdles, opportunities at every stage of the journey to take a product to market. As a leading NGO, we don't have a commercial agenda, so this really allows us to provide objective expert advice and to really help support companies to successfully and effectively harness the power and the profitability of the shift to plant-based and alternative proteins. So here you can see our 5 action areas. We work with stakeholders across all of these areas, and we run campaigns across these in numerous different ways. So my work and Mathilde's work focuses most on supporting businesses to really help them provide more and better alternative protein products and options, which are affordable and accessible to the consumer. But my colleagues, we also work to influence government and policy to ensure a favourable landscape for products. And we also work to connect startups and investors, build alliances with other NGOs, and really just try and inspire and educate the consumer to transition towards a more plant-based lifestyle. We partner with a lot of key companies, from leading brands, retailers, food service providers, to really support them in their activities. And we also work with startups as part of our incubator program. So depending on the unique needs and the unique challenges of the companies that we work with, depends on how we work, but our goal is always just to support everyone in taking small steps towards an affordable and accessible alternative protein offering. So if anybody's interested in learning a bit more about our interventions or working with us, I would love to share some more information. Please do get in contact, and perhaps we can work together. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Mathilde. She is Senior Project Management and Lead for ProVeg's Cellular Agriculture Project. and she'll be sharing some really exciting results of 2 new reports that we've published recently. So Mathilde, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Mathilde. I'm a Senior Project Manager at ProVeg, and I'm really pleased to be here today with you to talk about cultivated meat and communication strategies, as well as present the findings of our recent report on the impact of imagery on consumer perceptions of around cultivated meat. So first, I will talk about early consumer trends and key drivers and barriers towards the acceptance of cultivated meat, and then we will dive into our survey findings. With the approval of cultivated chicken in Singapore in 2020 and the commercialization of other cultivated meat products in other parts of the world coming closer and closer, it's more important than ever to talk about consumer acceptance and communication strategies to successfully engage with people. And one great narrative about cultivated meat is that it has the potential to make meat part of the solution. I think you are all probably well aware of the impact of industrialized animal agriculture and the devastating effects on the environment, animals, and human health from deforestation, species extinction to antibiotic resistance. And studies have shown that compared to conventional meat, cultivated meat has many benefits in terms of health, animals, and the environment. But all expected benefits remain speculative until people buy cultivated meat in supermarket when available. So what is the general trend in terms of consumer acceptance at the moment? Well, we can be cautiously optimistic with a relatively high willingness to try cultivated meat across the world. And it's very important to figure out who is going to be really excited about cultivated meat and be the first adopters. So if we look at the innovation adoption curve, early adopters tend to be the most influential people within any market space, and they often have a degree of thought leadership for other potential adopters. So for the success of cultivated meat, it's important to understand who are the first potential adopters, what are the characteristics of this group, and define key messages in a way that will resonate with them. So who are the potential first adopters? Well, it's mostly young people. Survey shows that they are more likely to be in favor of the production of cultivated meat. And in Germany, for instance, a recent survey from the Good Food Institute shows that an impressive 82% of the 18 to 24 years old would buy cultivated meat if available. And gender makes a difference too. Across all age groups, men are more likely to give cultivated meat a chance than women. And other demographic factors play a role. Early adopters tend to live in urban areas, identify as politically liberal, they tend to be more educated, and they consume animal products. But they also tend to reduce their intake as they are increasingly aware of the impact of animal agriculture. And on this aspect, cultivated meat is emerging as a potential option for consumers interested in cutting down their conventional meat consumption without having to compromise on taste or flavor. So targeting the meat reducers and flexitarian segment is strategic. This group is already open to changing its behavior, and it also represents a substantial portion of the population. So now that we have a better understanding of who could be the first potential consumer, let's see what are the main drivers and barriers towards public acceptance of cultivated meat. So some of the strongest points to promote cultivated meat, according to various research, are the reduced risk of pathogen contamination, the fact that no antibiotic is needed, also the potential for improving nutritional values, for instance, replacing transaturated fatty acids with omega fatty acids, and also the benefits for the environment and animals. And here, it's interesting to note that personal benefits win over societal or altruistic benefits. So it suggests that emphasizing personal over societal benefits can foster greater acceptance. And people's main concerns or perceived risk are about unnaturalness, health, fear of genetic engineering, or also about the end of traditional animal agriculture. And here, the yuck factor and fear of unnaturalness is very much linked to a lack of familiarity with cultivated meat, which can be reduced as people get more exposed to what cultivated meat is and what the benefits are. And familiarity is indeed an important acceptance driver for novel food products. So studies show that the more people know about cultivated meat, the more they are willing to try and buy it. So that's why it's important to communicate about the product before commercialization. And here I'll just mention a few communication considerations that we can discuss during the panel discussion in a few minutes. So building trust is crucial for the acceptance of cultivated meat. It means that the cellular agriculture sector should really understand the concerns and perceived risks from the general public. It's also important to be transparent before people even ask, foster dialogue among various stakeholders, and here farmers are, for instance, very important stakeholders. It's important also to communicate science in an easy to understand way. And here also regulatory agencies will have an important role in building trust about cultivated meat with the general public. But it's also important to create excitement about the products and create attractive narratives around cultivated meat. So it means focusing on the product features and benefits, and as I said, with focus on personal benefits. It's also about creating positive feelings and emotions around cultivated meat. And on this note, I really like Upside Food's vision, which is to make our favorite food a force for good. And also sensory experience. So about cultivated meat is very important. So here it really has to deliver on the consumer experience, and it has to inspire people's and their taste buds. And about inspiring people's taste buds, at ProVeg, we wanted to answer the following question: to what extent do the images currently portraying cultivated meat influence consumer sentiment? So the imagery currently portraying cultivated meat in the media is very much around laboratory setting and not food-based at all. And here you can see the results of a quick Google search. So all of the top images illustrate cultivated meat with blue medical gloves and petri dishes. And here I think it's important to note that the existing photos tagged as cultivated meat on stock photo sites are usually images of conventionally produced meat, which is placed in petri dishes. So it's not an accurate representation of what the final product looks like. So to understand the impact of images on consumer perceptions, we conducted a survey among 750 participants in the UK who were divided into 3 survey groups. So the first survey group was exposed to both sets of images, lab-based and food-based. And our 2 other survey groups were only shown one set of images, either lab-based or food-based. And all groups had the same short description of cultivated meat, which you can find at the end of our report. So first, we wanted to assess our participants' general understanding of cultivated meat, and we asked all participants to share their initial thoughts on what cultivated meat is. So here you can see some of the most commonly stated answers. And to summarize these open answers more clearly, we categorize them into their level of understanding. And as you can see here, about 57% of our total respondents have no understanding of cultivated meat, and 15% of them have the wrong understanding, stating, for instance, that it was plant-based or that it was conventional meat cooked or prepared differently. And approximately 16% of respondents had some correct understanding of cultivating meat, stating that it was made from cells or that no animals are killed. And only 2% of respondents had a good understanding of the term. And we also categorized understanding by sentiment, and 90% of respondents presented a neutral understanding of cultivated meat. So here it shows that we have a great opportunity ahead to position cultivated meat in a positive way to the general public to encourage future adoption. And we also analyze the responses based on dietary habits. And here you can see that flexitarians had the most accurate understanding of cultivated meat amongst all dietary groups. And as I mentioned before, flexitarians are a key group for cultivated meat. So these results are already promising. So you can see that our respondents have a very limited and neutral understanding of cultivated meat, and it gives us, as an industry, a great opportunity to shape consumer perception. So now let's move on to our different survey group results. So the first group was exposed to both sets of images, and we asked them which images do they most frequently see associated with cultivated meat. And here you can see that a majority of respondents most frequently see lab-based pictures associated with cultivated meat. And also a majority of respondents say that lab-based images are most representative of cultivated meat. And these results are not so surprising due to the heavy use of lab-based images in the media to portray cultivated meat. And respondents are, in our second survey group were shown only lab-based images, and they were asked how accurately these pictures portray cultivated meat. And you can see here that approximately 64% of consumers stated that these images portray cultivated meat accurately or very accurately. And we asked the very same question to our third survey group, which were only shown pictures of end products. And here you can see that almost half of respondents stated that these images portray cultivated meat accurately or very accurately. So it tells us that even if respondents most frequently see lab-based pictures associated with cultured meat, it's clear that they perceive both lab-based and food-based images as accurate representation of cultivated meat. So it gives us a good opportunity to position cultivated meat products as tasty food without confusing consumers. And in order to answer our key question about how images influence consumer perceptions of cultivated meat, respondents were presented with several statements to express how the different images impacted their attitude towards cultivated meat. And although not huge differences, we can see that respondents who were shown food-based images see cultivated meat as more appealing and more tasty than those who were shown lab-based images. And respondents were also slightly more likely to agree or strongly agree that cultivated meat is nutritious and affordable with food-based images. And with regards to sentiment around health, respondents who were shown lab-based images were more likely to agree that cultivated meat is healthy. However, here the results could be skewed by the fact that the food-based images shown included burgers and nuggets, which tend to not have a healthy perception. And overall, it's quite promising to see that regardless of the imagery used, a majority of respondents perceived cultivated meat as nutritious, innovative, safe to eat, sustainable, and ethical. And finally, we also asked respondents to rate how likely they were to try and purchase cultivated meat, as well as to replace conventional meat with cultivated meat. And you can see here that the results are very similar between the two survey groups, particularly when it comes to the likelihood to try cultivated meat, which goes up to 60%. And here, it's quite impressive to see that around 40% of respondents would replace conventional meat with cultivated meat. And here again, regardless of the pictures used. So to summarize, we can see that there are few marked differences in sentiment towards cultivated meat between the survey groups. However, respondents who were shown food-based images see cultivated meat as more appealing to eat, tasty, nutritious, and affordable. And given that more than half of our survey respondents had no understanding of cultivated meat, information and education about the products are important in ensuring that cultivated meat becomes more widely understood by consumers and that their sentiment remains neutral or positive. And knowing that respondents think that both lab-based and food-based images can portray cultivated meats accurately, it gives the industry an opportunity to use more accurate images without confusing consumer. And here at ProVeg, we definitely recommend the use of food-based images in communication. So thank you very much for your attention. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Mathilde. Super interesting results, and I think we'll talk about it a little bit more in our discussion as well. So I'd like to introduce David Kay, Communication Director at Upside Food, and also Professor Nick Linhey, Professor of Business and Ethics at the University of Veta. Welcome both. So I thought that before we dive into our questions, and obviously the audience, we have lots of time for audience Q&A, so do put your questions in the Q&A section. But before we dive in, it would be great just to kind of go around the room and maybe just share a little bit about who you are and what you do. And then I have lots of questions for you. So David, I'll pass over to you first, just for a super short introduction.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks, ProVeg, for organizing and all the attendees for being here. I'm really excited for this discussion. As Stephanie said, my name's David Kay. I'm the Director of Communications at Upside Foods. We are a cultivated meat, poultry, and seafood company based in the US, in California, Bay Area. We were formerly called Memphis Meats. We rebranded last year. Upside Foods is the first cultivated meat company in the world. And it is really focused on bringing to market delicious products grown directly from animal cells. And really excited to be here. So thank you.
Thank you. Nick.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate in this nice round, in this nice webinar. I'm Nick. I'm Professor of Business and Ethics at the University of Veta. Veta is a small town located in the northern part of Germany, and it is one of Germany's hotspots for mass farming industry. So maybe you can imagine it's a tough issue to do business around cultured meat. So I'm an economist, so I have focused on sustainable development, or the question of how we can realize sustainable development in our society. I've done a lot of research on consumer acceptance of cultured meat within the last years. For me, this is a fantastic opportunity to bring society on a new level of sustainability. And I'm looking forward to discuss today with you how we can go on in the future.
Thank you. And Mathilde, obviously we've just heard your presentation, but did you want to say a few words about yourself?
Yes, sure. So I'm project manager at ProVeg, and I also coordinate ProVeg Cell Act project, which was funded in 2019 as a way to work towards a ProVeg mission to reduce conventional animal consumption by 2050. So 40 by 2050. So sorry, 50% by 2040, getting confused here. And my background is in communication and media. I studied at the Sorbonne University, and I researched as part of my studies on corporate communication around cultivated meat. And since then, I kept being involved in the field from a communication perspective, but also more broadly on the impact cellular agriculture can have.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go to David first. So Upside Food has made a lot of progress when it comes to production of cultured meat. So as you're kind of coming closer to market entry, like what's your strategy in terms of communication, and how do you describe cultured meat and your products to the general public?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the strategy really starts from the beginning for us. And I think that's one of the core components of the way we've tried to communicate is we've tried to really be early and often with our public communications. An example of this is, our media debut was when we were less than 6 months old as a company and had like 4 employees. And it was a lot to manage. We were very focused on research and development at that time and still are. But our CEO, Uma, to his credit, I think really recognized from the beginning that we needed to be communicating what we were doing, why we were doing it, how we were doing it. And that's something that we've tried to keep up over the years. So we participated in a full-length documentary called Meet the Future, which really gave a peek behind the curtain at the people behind Upside Foods, in addition to the technology and the stuff we were working on. We have regularly updated the public as we've achieved various milestones with respect to research and development accomplishments, or funding rounds, or new hires, building the team. We just did a big ribbon cutting ceremony for our production facility in California. And so we've really tried to be open and sort of bring not just consumers, but other stakeholders along the journey with us. I think that's another important piece of the strategy, is not just focusing on consumers. I think consumers are obviously incredibly important. And I think the closer we get to commercialization, the greater sort of share of our communications efforts will go towards consumers. But the reality is food touches so many different stakeholders, whether that's, nonprofits working on sustainability, or members of the meat industry, or farmers, or regulators and policymakers. And so from the beginning, we have really wanted to make sure that we are building relationships with all of those groups, because they all have a stake in the food system and the future of the food system, and they all have also just really valuable expertise and thoughts and perspectives that they can bring to the table. I think the other thing I will say is the importance of differentiating cultivated meat from plant-based, I think, is one of the things that's very top of mind for us. And I think, just watching the presentation from a few minutes ago, and just the level of confusion about what exactly cultivated meat was, that is something that we have been actively trying to combat from day one. And I think we still have a lot of work ahead of us. But I think we are finding ways to really make it clear to consumers and other stakeholders what the difference is between our products and the products that are already more accessible on market. So those are some of the things that come to mind when it comes to how we've approached communications. I think the other thing is that sort of integration between communications and marketing and branding, I think, is another really important thing. As pre-revenue companies, pre-commercial companies, the line between communications and marketing is a little bit blurry. But as we get closer to commercialization and as we mature as a company and as an industry, I think those two functions will increasingly separate, and that will be sort of the natural progression of things.
Thank you, 100%. In terms of that consumer confusion piece, like I think that there's been a lot of research to show that, you know, consumers are confused or they don't have a good awareness of this. What kind of messaging have you been using to try and combat that, and what's been the reception? And Nick, I'm sure you have some research of your own to maybe offer some thoughts here as well, but David, like, what's been the messaging that you've been using to communicate?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few different ways to get at it. One is just sort of straightforward. It's not just having a positive statement about what we are, but also what we're not. So we're not a vegan or a vegetarian product, for instance, is something that we try and say a lot, because again, we really want to make sure consumers and everybody understands exactly what we are. I think another way is sort of the cues that folks will get from, I mean, related to the research project you all just presented, related to you know, the photographs we use, you know, the sort of aesthetic of the brand. Certainly, you know, one of the reasons for being called Memphis Meats in the beginning was to really make it clear that we were not, we were different than a plant-based vegan or vegetarian company. We were, you know, producing delicious meat. And I think that was something that was really important for us. I think the other big piece here will be, you know, on the label. And you know, the sort of mechanics of that will differ in different jurisdictions and different geographies. But I think it's really important that consumers who are buying the product in the supermarket or anywhere else can see words that indicate to them that this is a meat product. We think it's really important that the products be labeled as meat, for, you know, public health reasons, making sure people aren't eating these thinking they're made of plants when they may have an allergy to the meat product. So there's just, I think, a lot of different ways that we can kind of go at that. I think ultimately it's going to require products being on market and being a lot more accessible to consumers to really drive the message home. I think it's difficult to communicate exactly what something is without having products on market. The other thing I'll add is I think providing a peek into the production process is really helpful as well. And that's something we've tried to be very open about with our production facility that we recently opened. You know, there are windows all around that space. We've done videos inside of it. We did a virtual ribbon cutting ceremony, and just walking people through the process in which it's made, I think helps sort of clarify how it is and, you know, what it is and why it's different than a vegan or a vegetarian meat alternative.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that transparency is really important, and I think just that's how maybe you gain a bit more trust. Nick, have you got any thoughts on kind of messaging and I guess your recommendations from your research around, you know, how we can increase awareness and acceptance in the consumer?
Yeah. What we are doing at the University of Fechter is we are focusing on new dimensions as antecedents of the acceptance of cultured meat. So in particular, we're focusing on these so-called organizational factors. Also, for example, it's company size, company location, industry affiliation, sustainability performance, financial performance, and so on. So let me briefly explain why these organizational characteristics matter. So cultured meat is a disruptive innovation, and this implies that it is surrounded by a high degree of uncertainty. So consumers have no experience with the product, and in addition, they are not able to evaluate the product characteristics, for example, the quality, the health aspect, or sustainability performance. So it can be said that cultured meat has a so-called liability of newness. And at the same time, cultured meat has the character of a credence guild. So, and in situations where consumers cannot directly evaluate the product, they refer to alternative information, such as the organizations that produce cultured meat or sells cultured meat. So, and these alternative information spill over to the product. So in a nutshell, organizational factors allow consumers to make inferences about unknown product characteristics. And in our research, indeed, we demonstrated that organizational factors affects perceptions of cultured meat. So in addition to the factors that we know, so meaning we integrated in our studies product characteristics and also characteristics of individuals, and we observed that we are able to explain an additional part of the variance in terms of acceptance of cultured meat. So, for example, within an experimental study, we compared the perceptions of a multinational company that produces cultured meat and a startup company. So, and our results show that multinational companies have advantages in terms of competencies due to their age, for example. So, and this in turn helps them to argue for the safety of the product, and they are able to do it better than startups. At the same time, startups have advantages when it comes to emotional evaluation of cultured meat. So in detail, we showed that our startups are more strongly associated with excitement, for example. So, and excitement and so on that can be used to play we call it the bankrupt card in order to promote the acceptance of cultured meat. So in summary, if we are able to understand how and which organizational factors affect perceptions of cultured meat, then we are able to design organization-specific market entry or marketing strategies for cultured meat. So, however, and this should be said, there is no one-size-fits-all approach because every company has its own and specific characteristics. So thus the general managerial implication is to say that every company has to build its own story that is based on its specific advantages.
That's so interesting, Nick. Thank you. David, I'm not sure if you were familiar with Nick's work prior to now, but do you at Upside Food ever think about this in terms of, you mentioned, differentiating yourself, but do you ever think about like your organization and the size and how that might impact consumer perception?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting point. And I think, I agree that at the end of the day, different companies are going to have different brands and different abilities to communicate to a different segment of consumers. And that's true for any industry. And ultimately, I think that's a good and healthy thing and a sign of a mature industry. A single company might not be everything to everybody, and that's okay. I think that is probably something that we haven't seen a ton of so far in the cultivated meat space because the industry is largely pre-commercial and pre-revenue, but I think it's something that we'll see a lot more of as things develop. And it's something I think you see in the existing incumbent food industry as well. Even within a given product category, you can have different brands pursuing different types of audiences. And ultimately, that is, I think, the place that we're headed in the cultivated meat space.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned earlier, David, your ribbon cutting ceremony and just being a bit kind of transparent about how you produce your products. So what's been the reception from all of those stakeholders that you spoke about, the consumer, other businesses? Like, what's been the reception of that? And would you maybe recommend that other companies do something similar, or is it very dependent on the brand?
Definitely. No, I mean, I think one of the interesting things about the cultivated meat space is that because it is so new, each of the individual companies are representing at this time more than just a brand. They're representing really the entire category. And so I think right now there's probably less of a need for that sort of differentiation in who we go after from a marketing segmentation perspective. I think to the specific question, and so yes, I would definitely recommend other companies do this sort of thing. I think the community has been really positive about Epic. I think part of that is because we chose to build it in a place that we felt was very values aligned with respect to the local community. It's in the Bay Area. It's very forward on issues like sustainability, on animal welfare. It's very pro innovation, and there's a really strong food culture there. And so it sort of checks all the boxes. You know, the building itself was actually initially, as a side note, going to be a supermarket. It was all built out, and then something happened at the company that was building it, and they decided not to proceed. And so then we eventually took over the lease. But I think, you know, a lot of the community members are just happy that it is finally destined for food in the way that it always was. We've toured a bunch of members of Congress and mayors in our local community and state legislators. And I think that has really been the feedback, though, that this is a much needed innovation, and it's something that they're happy to see, you know, cropping up in their backyard. And I think the Stephanie, that what you mentioned about the windows and just the ability to get that look inside has been really helpful for us, because again, we're very proud of our production process. We want to show it off to the world. And I think the world is interested in understanding how it works also. And so I think there's a lot of value in terms of building trust, but also, as we were talking about earlier, in terms of differentiating our products from the meat alternatives that are out there in the market. Differentiating our products as meat I think the ribbon cutting has really helped with that.
100%. I think it's quite different from maybe the just more general food industry and how things are I guess communicated, or how open they are in terms of their processes, but I think definitely important for such an innovation. Matilda, I've seen you a while ago presented something where you spoke around some of the other companies who are doing interesting things with regards to their openness in terms of their facilities or their test kitchens, things like that. Can you share a little bit about companies that you think are doing really good things when it comes to, I guess, increasing trust in the consumer?
Yeah, so I think, as David mentioned, with the EPIC facility, I think using a pilot plan can be a really great tool to engage with the public and various stakeholders, for instance, policymakers who went to visit the EPIC facilities. So yeah, it can really be a great tool to engage with different public, foster also trust. And yeah, it gives people a great opportunity to see how cultivated meat is produced. And there are other similar initiatives. For instance, there's a company, Wild Type, based in California, and they're focusing on cultivated seafood. And they have their pilot production facility in San Francisco. And in the production facilities, you also have an education center, so to say, and a sushi bar also to try the products. And everything is separated with glass doors, so also as in the EPIC facilities. So you can really see that everything is transparent. People can see how the products are produced. And so yeah, I definitely think it's a great opportunity for companies. And we have also other examples, for instance, from Israel, where the company Super Meat has a test kitchen, so to say, where people can come in and dine and try the cultivated chicken product. And at the same time, they can see the production facilities. So here again, transparency is really at the center of the strategy. And I think it's really great to use this pilot plan to on the way to commercialization and to really normalize the concept and the production methods, and maybe kind of make it not so novel after all, and that people really understand what it is. And maybe after some point, it's going to be just, yeah, another kind of production method.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I think it was you earlier that mentioned kind of like cultural differences or differences between different countries in terms of communication. A question for all of you: have we seen any differences when it comes to, you know, the US or the European consumer in terms of acceptance, or in terms of like the drivers or barriers of acceptance? Yeah, when it comes to different types or different countries.
I mean, I'll defer to the others on this call in terms of the survey research. I think what I have experienced is there is a a strong appetite in almost any region. And I think some of the stuff that Mathilde showed earlier today with the map of consumer acceptance across regions speaks to that. What I think differs is sort of the motivation behind it. And I think this speaks to, again, just how many different areas an issue like food and meat touches. So for some regions, I think it is all about sustainability and animal welfare. For others, it's about food security or food safety. And I think we're seeing a lot of different motivations, but I think there is a, regardless of what the reason is, there's a pretty strong desire across the world for those sorts of things. But I'll defer to Mathilde and Nick if there are other more specific data and differences in terms of where they're seeing more or less acceptance.
Yeah, definitely in terms of the benefits, it can varies across countries, but still there is similar trends that we can see in the research where personal benefits usually win over societal benefits. So messages on consumer health and the health benefits really lead to greater acceptance and of cultivated products, I would say. But at the same time, I think we need far more research in Asia. So far, it's been really focused in Western countries. So here, yeah, we need additional research to see the different drivers, but also barriers for acceptance across the world. And I would like to mention also some other similar trends. For instance, technical framing, also in various regions, usually doesn't lead to more acceptance of the products. So I would say positive framings and focusing on personal benefits. But at the same time, it's very important also to remain transparent for consumer trust. So here we have this case where companies have to balance between informing the public about what the technology is, transparency, production processes, but also having a focus on the product features and benefits.
I would like to add another point. So I think we have to interpret the existing findings a little bit carefully. The reason is that at least all existing studies that I know are focusing on the intentional level. So they are investigating willingness to buy, willingness to try, willingness to consume, whatever. So, and we know that intentions do not always translate into behavior. So therefore, what we can do with the current type of research is we can, or the research help us to better understand what are predictors of consumer acceptance or general acceptance, but they are not very helpful in discussing the levels of acceptance in different regions. So if we want to do that, then we need a new kind of research in that sense, that we need research that is able to work with behavioral data. So, and that's a little bit the pity today, that because the product is not already is not already available on a broad scale, it's really hard or maybe even impossible to do such research.
Hopefully one day that will be more possible to do.
I hope so.
It would definitely be interesting. I have loads more questions, but we're running out of time. So let's go to the audience quickly. We have a couple of questions in the chat. So first question, if we don't call cultured meat vegan, is there a term to describe both vegan and cultivated products? Something like cruelty-free? And what description of people who only eat cultivated meat, like would they be omnivores, or would there be a different dietary term to describe people who only eat cultivated meat?
Yeah, it's a super interesting question. I mean, I'll take the second one first. In my view, yes, if you eat cultivated meat, you are eating meat. You are an omnivore. I think there's some sort of semantic squibbling that we could do there for sure, and other people may hold different views, but that's my perspective. And yeah, I mean, I think a grouping of terms for all of the products out there that sort of have that similar mission would be an interesting thing. I don't know if that term exists yet. I think some people will use phrases like alternative proteins, but I think there's there could be a more compelling opportunity there as well. So I think it's a good call out.
Amazing, thank you. Next question from the audience. Ms. Hill, this is for you from your presentation, the map slide that you showed. What was the methodology for the metrics on your map slide?
Was it like the first map with all the
yeah.
willingness to try? Oh, it's results from various studies. So I'm happy to share the slides where you have the sources of all results mentioned.
Thank you. Somebody else is asking if the cultured meat industry as a whole has an alignment on responses to some of the issues that the skeptics tend to bring up to try and slow the development of the cultured meat industry. So, for example, FBS or energy or water requirements, perception of genetic engineering. Is there an alignment, or maybe you each have your own opinion as well, but yeah, is there an alignment on the response?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go for it, Mathilde.
I wanted to say that, it's definitely very important for the industry to have a common language. And we've seen some initiatives in the US and also in Europe with the creation of trade organizations, I would say. So in Europe, we have Cellular Agriculture Europe. And in the US, I think, David, maybe you can talk more about it, is meat, poultry and seafood innovation, also to represent the interest of cultivated meat and seafood companies. And and as for Cellular Agriculture Europe, for instance, they have an FAQ where they go through also some critical questions, for instance, FBS, or use of GMO, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. The group, as Mathilde mentioned, in the US is the Association for Meat, Poultry, and Seafood Innovation, or AMPS Innovation. And it is a trade group for the US-based cultivated meat industry. And some of the focus of that group is to think through, communications on behalf of the entire industry. So that is part of it. I think the group is, at this point, more focused on regulatory policy than anything else. But I think it is absolutely something where there can be some common ground. I also do think, though, Stephanie, as you alluded to, some of the companies are probably just going to differ on some of these questions, and that is normal for a mature industry. Again, when you have different companies that are, going for different sets of consumers, and so I think some of that is just the nature of a flourishing and diverse industry. But some of it, I think, is absolutely content that these collective organizations can address.
Absolutely, and I think forums like this is great to create alignment and collaborate on really important messages as well. So we have just over 5 minutes left, so we'll do just one final question. Could you each maybe share one mistake that you've seen companies make when it comes to communicating about cultivated meat, and then perhaps a recommendation of just like a key takeaway to summarize what's one piece of advice that you'd give to people who aren't quite sure on the best way to communicate these types of products?
I can start. While working on the imagery report, I had a look at 100 companies, cultivated meat companies. I had a look at their websites to see how they are communicating about the products. And about 20% of them are actually still using lab-based images to communicate about the product. So here I would recommend using food-based images. And also when companies are carrying interviews with journalists, here the recommendation would be to do it in a kitchen setting rather than in a laboratory setting, because if now all the product development takes place mostly in laboratories, in the long run, the production facilities are more going to look like breweries as epic facilities. So if we want to give the public an accurate image of how the production process are going to look like, I think it's very important to start from the beginning with a food narrative and like brewery-like facilities, and go away from the laboratory narrative that we have now. And while checking the company's website, I also saw that not all companies have a frequently asked question page, and I was quite surprised actually, because I think it's really a big requirement for such a novel product. Yeah, so, and also it's important to do so when you have an FAQ, to use positive language, because I've seen for some companies, for instance, they said that cultivated meat is not artificial, it's not fake, it's not synthetic. And I think by mentioning fake, synthetic, artificial, it can actually raise more concerns from the person reading this FAQ. So I think also here, a positive framing with transparency is very important.
It's really great advice, Mathilde. Thank you. David?
Yeah, no, I think those are really good points. I like to say we're making food products, not science projects. And it's important that we're being upfront about that we're always framing things in terms of what is the end goal of the companies. And the end goal of the companies in the industry is really to make delicious meat products. And so I think it is really important to center that in communications. The other stuff I would add, we've touched on a little bit before. I'd say one, a lack of differentiation between cultivated and plant-based meat is something I see a lot. I think, use of terms like meat substitute or meat alternative are, in my view, not accurate and not helpful to the industry, and not helpful to consumers or other stakeholders either. Because at the end of the day, we need consumers to understand exactly what we are and what we aren't. And I think that's really important. The last thing I'd say, I think, is just, I mentioned earlier that in this early stage industry, every company is a representative not just of themselves and not just of their brand, but of the entire category. And I think that's a lot of responsibility, and it is on those brands to make sure that when they're speaking and when they're making actions, they're doing it in a reasonable and thoughtful way. We like to say one of the phrases associated with Silicon Valley, which is where Upside Foods is based, is move fast and break things. And we have always thought that's a terrible way to make food. It's a terrible way to regulate food. People care about food in a much more intimate way than they might about an app or a website. And it's really important that we are taking that trust and respecting it. And so I think that's the other thing I would say is just, be thoughtful in your decision making, and make sure, remember that you're representing more than just your company. You're representing an entire category.
100%. I love that advice. And Nick?
Yeah, I think one of the most important points is to admit that acceptance is a critical bottleneck that cultured meat can diffuse in the market. So, and to get acceptance is really a difficult issue, and maybe it's easier to get cultured meat ready from a technical perspective than to get the acceptance in society. So I think what we need is a strong narrative for the social relevance of cultured meat. So otherwise we could also do research on the acceptance of air taxis, of smartphones, apps, or whatever. So the nice thing also, as Mathilde presented at the beginning, there are good reasons why cultured meat is of social relevance. However, we also have to be transparent that there are a lot of open questions. Cultured meat is surrounded by a high degree of uncertainty. So we do not know what the sustainability performance will be at the end or in a few years. But we can also say that we as a society, we do not have an unlimited window of time to change the production of meat due to the huge environmental footprint. And it has to be said that the modern society is not likely to survive this century if we do not find new approaches that bring us on a more sustainable path. And against this backdrop, I think it's fair to say that we as a society, we are at a point now where we have to accept uncertainties. And we also have to accept or have to take the risk. And I think if we are going in that direction, we have also some new arguments in order to convince people, in order to convince society why it's important to give cultured meat a fair chance.
Absolutely. And on that note, we will wrap this up. I think really exciting time for this industry, and I think it's very important that we all come together to discuss these things so that we do have alignment. So thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to David, Nick, and Mathilde as well for all of your insights. This session is being recorded and it will be shared along with Mathilde's presentation as well. So if you want to revisit anything, you absolutely can. But yeah, thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you so much for joining us. Have a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you.
Very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.